You think you know what marriage should look like? You wake up, you make breakfast together, you hold hands, you argue about the dishes, make up before bed, and call it love, comfort, routine, safety. That is what most people chase. That is what you were told to build. But Saint Teresa of Avila saw something in 1562 that would shake every married person who heard it. She saw what happens when a soul treats marriage like a warm bed instead of a battlefield. And what she witnessed did not come from books or sermons. It came from visions so terrifying that her confessors ordered her to write them down immediately. Beatriz had spent years in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. Don Alfonso Sanchez de Capeta, Teresa's father, was rigidly pious, demanding, strict to the point of severity. He forbade romance novels in the house. Beatriz read them anyway, hiding them from her husband. She told Teresa one thing in private and demanded another in public. Teresa watched her mother live split in two, caught between what she wanted and what was expected. Years later, Teresa would say that watching her mother's marriage taught her one undeniable truth. A life built on comfort rather than truth will crack you in half. She would not split herself. She would not build a life on keeping everyone comfortable. She would find truth, even if it destroyed her. Otilio Rodriguez, and published by ICS Publications in 1987, which contains her complete autobiography known as The Book of Her Life, written under obedience to her confessors, and direct excerpts from The Interior Castle, written in 1577, both primary source documents housed in Carmelite archives. We are also drawing from the School of Mary Theological Analysis, published in June 2020, which examines Teresa's original Spanish manuscripts on the First Commandment and spousal relationships. Now back to the information. She admitted it openly in her autobiography. She said she entered the convent driven by servile fear more than by love. She thought being a nun would be like purgatory on earth, but at least it would keep her safe. At least she would not have to choose between truth and comfort every single day like her mother had. Many were not there for God. They were there because their families sent them. The parlor was full of gossip, vanity, flattery, distractions. Teresa fell into it. She enjoyed being well-dressed. She cared for her hands, used perfumes, wore ornaments. She spent 18 years praying inconsistently, pulled between the world and God, never fully committing to either. She was her mother all over again, split, comfortable, dying inside. Then in 1554, everything broke. Teresa was 39 years old. She encountered a statue of Christ, wounded and bleeding. The image pierced her. She fell to the ground, weeping. She saw herself clearly for the first time. She had been living exactly like those who build marriages on comfort rather than sacrifice. She had wanted God on her terms. She had wanted prayer that felt good. She had wanted a spiritual life that did not cost her anything. She had treated her relationship with God the way most people treat marriage, as something to make life easier, not as something that demands everything. And he spoke to her as a jealous spouse. He said words that shocked her spiritual directors when she reported them. He said, "I do not want you to speak to human beings anymore. I want all of you." And God was telling her what he tells every soul who seeks true union. You cannot split your heart. You cannot give me half and keep half for yourself. The first commandment is absolute. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Not most of your heart. Not the part that is left over after you have made everyone else comfortable. All of it. Because she was not talking only about religious vows. She was talking about the human heart and how it functions in every relationship. She wrote in The Interior Castle that God created the human heart to be given entirely to him. That is its design. That is its purpose. And when a person tries to divide that heart, when they try to give God some and give a spouse the rest, when they build a life on keeping things comfortable and balanced and safe, they violate the very structure of how love works. But finding ways to interpret it, diluting it, or finding ways to get around it without confronting the challenge is cowardly and treasonable. They want someone to make life easier. They want affection, companionship, security, pleasure. They want to be understood, supported, validated. And there is nothing wrong with any of those things. But when comfort becomes the foundation, when the entire structure of the relationship is built on avoiding discomfort, avoiding sacrifice, avoiding the hard work of dying to yourself, then the marriage becomes a trap. It becomes another version of what her mother lived, a life split in two, a life where you are always choosing between what you want and what is true, a life where you are always compromising, always adjusting, always making excuses for why you're not giving everything. Marriages were built on keeping up appearances. Wives stayed silent when they should have spoken. Husbands pursued comfort when they should have pursued holiness. Both partners settled into routines that looked like love, but were really just mutual agreements to not disturb each other's peace. And Teresa saw what that did to souls. It made them soft. It made them selfish. It made them incapable of the one thing marriage is supposed to do: make both people saints. It is saying yes to suffering if suffering is what the beloved needs. It is laying down your life, your preferences, your comfort, your safety, everything, because love demands it. But they had never given themselves completely. They had never sacrificed. They had never let love transform them. And when they died, their souls were so attached to comfort, so dependent on safety, so shaped by decades of avoiding suffering, that they could not bear the fire of God's love. They were not ready for union. They were not ready for heaven. They had spent their entire lives learning how to keep themselves comfortable, and now they had to unlearn it all in purgatory. It had built its whole existence around avoiding discomfort, and now it was suffering intensely because it had to learn in death what it refused to learn in life, that love requires the complete gift of self. The husband would wake up, and his first thought would not be, how can I be comfortable today? His first thought would be, how can I serve my wife? How can I serve God? What am I being called to sacrifice today? The wife would face conflicts, and her instinct would not be to protect her own comfort. Her instinct would be to ask, what is true here? What does love demand? What am I afraid to give? But Teresa insisted that this is the only way marriage works as it was designed to work, because marriage is not primarily about your happiness. It is not primarily about your comfort. It is a sacrament. It is a visible sign of an invisible reality. And the reality it points to is the relationship between Christ and the church. Christ did not make the church comfortable. He gave himself entirely for her. He bled for her. He died for her. He held nothing back. And the church is called to respond the same way. Complete self-giving. Total sacrifice. No holding back. She saw marriages that lasted 50 years where both partners died as selfish as the day they were married. She saw couples who raised children and maintained homes and kept all the external structures intact, but never once truly gave themselves to each other. And she saw the shock in their eyes when they stood before God and realized how much they had wasted. Teresa did not say this to condemn marriage. She said it to save it. Because she understood what most people miss. The human heart is made for total self-giving. It is made to be given entirely to God. And when you try to split that heart, when you try to give part of it to God and part of it to a spouse and part of it to your own comfort, you are not being generous. You are being divided, and a divided heart cannot love fully. It cannot love the way God designed it to love. Detachment from needing to be right, needing to be validated, needing to be comfortable. You wake up in the morning and instead of asking, what do I need today? You ask, what is God asking me to give today? Am I more attached to getting what I want than to loving freely? This does not mean you do not communicate. It means you check your own heart first. You make sure you're not demanding comfort as your right. What will make us holier? What requires more trust in God? And then they say yes to that, even if it terrifies them. They pour themselves out completely because that is what love does. They had decided that their marriage would not be about their comfort. It would be about their holiness. And every decision they made flowed from that foundation. They asked, what does detachment require? What does generosity demand? How can we trust God more? When they prayed together, they did not pray for comfort. They prayed for the grace to love each other the way Christ loves the church. Completely, without reservation, without holding anything back. Happiness depends on circumstances. Joy is something deeper. It is the peace that comes from knowing you are living in truth. It is the confidence that comes from complete self-giving. It is the freedom that comes from no longer protecting your own comfort. Intimacy is built on vulnerability. And you cannot be truly vulnerable with someone if you are constantly protecting yourself from discomfort. When both partners are willing to suffer, willing to give everything, willing to die to themselves, they can be completely open with each other. They do not have to hide their weaknesses. They do not have to pretend they have it all together. They can stand before each other naked in every sense and say, here I am, all of me, the good and the broken. Take it, use it, do with it what love demands. Instead of comfort, the mechanics are the same. The heart dynamics are identical. The only difference is the form the sacrifice takes. Staying faithful through a long season of dryness and difficulty. The specifics change. The principle does not. Love is total self-giving, or it is not love at all. Because the moment you try to do it in your own strength, you are right back to building on comfort. You're trying to make yourself comfortable with your own performance. You're trying to avoid the discomfort of total dependence on God. People who have stopped trying to manage their own comfort. People who have let go of their need to control outcomes. People who have surrendered so completely that they have nothing left to lose. It is the death of the self that demands to be comfortable, to be safe, to be in control. And most people cannot bear it. They get to the edge of that death and they pull back. They renegotiate. They find a compromise. They build a life that looks sacrificial on the outside, but is really just another version of comfort seeking dressed up in religious language. She saw people who prayed for hours, fasted, did penance, served in ministry, all while keeping their hearts completely protected. They would give God their time, their money, their effort, but not their comfort, not their safety, not their control. And she said these people were further from union with God than people who were openly struggling. Because at least the strugglers were honest. At least they knew they were divided. The people who thought they were sacrificing while actually protecting their comfort were lying to themselves. And that lie kept them trapped. If he asked you to forgive something you think is unforgivable, could you forgive? If he asked you to stay in a difficult situation that every instinct tells you to leave, could you stay? If he asked you to speak a truth that will destroy the peace, could you speak it? You have drawn a line and said, I will sacrifice up to here, but no further. And Teresa said that line is exactly where your spiritual growth stops. That line is exactly where your marriage becomes stagnant. That line is exactly where you cease to be transformed. He loves you too much to let you settle for a marriage that looks fine, but is really just two people using each other to avoid suffering. He will bring you to the edge of what you think you can bear. He will ask you to give the thing you're most terrified to give. And your response in that moment will determine whether your marriage becomes a path to holiness or a prison of comfort. Teresa experienced this herself in 1572 on November 18th. Christ appeared to her and placed a ring on her finger. He said, From this day forward you are my bride. Consider your honor to be mine and mine to be yours. This was her spiritual marriage. And immediately after it, everything in her life got harder. Not easier, harder. She faced opposition from church officials who thought her reforms were dangerous. She endured brutal physical illnesses. She traveled constantly in conditions that wrecked her body. She was misunderstood, slandered, accused of being deluded by the devil. And through all of it, she said the same thing. This is what spousal love looks like. This is the cost. This is the joy. She said she had received such assurance of coming one day to fruition of God that she almost imagined she had already come into possession of him. But she clarified, My soul would not like to come immediately into possession of God, for it does not believe it has deserved such grace. It only desires to continue in his service, even at the cost of terrible sufferings. That is the heart of sacrificial marriage. It is not that you seek suffering for its own sake. It is that you love so completely that suffering becomes irrelevant. You do not avoid it. You do not resent it. You pour yourself out, and whatever that costs is just the price of love. They try to build a Christian home, but underneath all of it, they are still operating from the same foundation. How can we make our life together as comfortable as possible? How can we minimize suffering? How can we avoid the really hard sacrifices? The first time you are asked to give something that costs you everything, you will discover that you have not built a marriage. You have built a mutual comfort agreement, and those agreements do not survive. They do not transform. They do not lead to holiness. They just make you increasingly selfish in increasingly subtle ways. Children raised in comfortable marriages learn that love means making each other happy. They learn that the goal of relationship is to minimize discomfort. They learn that when things get hard, you renegotiate, you compromise, you find a way back to comfort. And when those children grew up and got married, they built the same thing. Generation after generation of comfort seeking, dressed up as love. Children raised in sacrificial marriages saw something different. They saw parents who fought and made up not by sweeping things under the rug, but by both dying to themselves. They saw a mother choose to forgive when she had every right to hold a grudge. They saw a father choose to stay when leaving would have been easier. They saw both parents choose God's will over their own preferences again and again and again. And those children learned that love is not about comfort. Love is about becoming holy together. Love is about helping each other get to heaven even when it costs you everything. They said she was condemning her nuns to suffering. But Teresa knew what she was doing. She was removing every possible source of comfort so that the nuns would have to depend entirely on God. And what happened in that tiny convent over the next 20 years proved her right. Those nuns became some of the holiest women in Spain, not because they suffered, but because they stopped protecting themselves from suffering. They learned to love without holding back. But here's the key. You cannot do this halfway. You cannot dip your toe in sacrificial love and keep one foot in comfort. You cannot say, I will sacrifice in these areas, but not in those. Because the moment you start bargaining, you're back to building on comfort, you're back to protecting yourself, you're back to the divided heart that Teresa saw destroy her mother. Either your marriage is built on the foundation of dying to yourself, or it is built on the foundation of protecting yourself. There is no middle ground. And most people spend their entire lives trying to find a middle ground that does not exist. They want sacrificial marriage without the actual sacrifice. They want union with God without the death to self that union requires. And they end up with neither. Teresa died October 4th, 1582 in Alba de Tormes. She was 67 years old. Her body had been wrecked by decades of travel, illness, and the sheer physical cost of pouring herself out completely. But witnesses said that in her final hours, she was radiant. She kept repeating verses from the Song of Songs. She kept saying, I am the bride of Christ. Finally I go to him. And then she died. Within hours, people started reporting miracles. The room filled with fragrance that should not have been there. Her body did not decay the way bodies are supposed to decay. 9 months later, they exhumed her and found her incorrupt. But the real miracle was not her body. The real miracle was what her life had proven, that it is possible to love completely, that it is possible to build a life, whether married or celibate, on total self-giving, that it is possible to stop protecting your comfort and start living for something infinitely greater. And you will die having never really lived. That union with God, whether you are married or celibate, is not a consolation prize for a hard life. It is the entire point. It is what you were made for. It is the only thing that will ever satisfy the human heart. They maintain the appearance of love, but inside they are divided, exhausted, slowly dying of comfort. And when they finally stand before God, they will see what Teresa saw in her visions, that they had been offered everything, and they chose safety instead. More than that, she chose to see the collapse as God's mercy. Teresa's response, preserved in Carmelite archives, said, "Blessed are you that God has removed the impediment of comfort. Now you can learn to love as Christ loves." Used her connections. The collapse forced him to stand before her completely broken. When she stayed, something in him broke open. He finally understood what marriage was for, not comfort, holiness. They miss the stripping away of everything false. They choose the familiar prison of comfort over terrifying dependence on God. She wrote, "Your husband is your path to holiness because of his resistance. Every time he dismisses your spiritual life, you have a choice. Resent him or see him as Christ saw those who crucified him. Father, forgive them. Your husband does not understand what he is rejecting. That knowledge is your cross. Carry it with love. Gave to the poor secretly, never complained, never manipulated, just loved and sacrificed. In year 9, the husband became gravely ill. In his terror, he asked her to pray. She stayed by his bed 6 days, praying, fasting. On the 7th day, the fever broke. He said, 'I do not know what you did, but I felt something change.' When people asked what changed, he always said, 'My wife loved me when I did not deserve it. She showed me what Christ's love looks like.' If you are secretly resenting while performing service, it is manipulation. True sacrifice asks for nothing, expects nothing. It gives because love gives." Half went to Rome accusing her of rebellion. For 2 years, she faced possible excommunication. She did not defend herself, just kept founding convents, kept sacrificing. The crisis resolved in her favor in 1577. Those 2 years taught her radical detachment from outcomes. You cannot reach union while holding anything back. Yes, as long as you make me happy. Yes, as long as life does not get too hard. Teresa would say that is not a real yes, that is a contract. Sacramental marriage says yes with no conditions, yes period, no escape clauses. You are choosing to pour yourself out completely no matter the cost. Because when comfort becomes the goal, sacrifice becomes impossible. When sacrifice becomes impossible, holiness becomes impossible. She fought this her entire life, made enemies, people who thought she was extreme, but she would not budge. She had lived both ways, 18 years comfortable, 27 years sacrificial. She knew which led to life. We researched to the original source documents because surface content does not change anyone. Drop a comment where you're watching from. Now back to the story. And ultimately, union with him that satisfies every hunger. Give everything. Trust God. That is the whole path. Her final words were recorded by the nuns at Alba de Tormes. She said, "Lord, I am a daughter of the church. I have lived for you. Now I come to you." Then she quoted the Song of Songs. "My beloved is mine and I am his." 67 years of choosing sacrifice over comfort. 67 years of dying so she could live. In the end, she got exactly what was promised. Union, complete, permanent, total. In a grave at Alba de Tormes lies a woman who changed how Christians understand love. But the grave they opened in 1583 revealed something medical examiners documented with precision. Her heart had been removed posthumously and placed in a separate reliquary. When examined, it showed a visible wound on the left side. Church investigators cross-referenced this with Teresa's own writings. In her autobiography, chapter 29, she described a mystical experience from 1560. An angel appeared, holding a golden spear tipped with fire. He thrust it through her heart repeatedly. The pain was intense, but also caused immense sweetness. She said, "The pain made me moan, and the sweetness this greatest pain caused me made me wish it would never end." A perforation. Cauterization marks. Tissue damage consistent with intense heat. Doctors who examined it in 1586 documented that no known natural process could create such a wound. The heart became known as the transverberated heart of Saint Teresa. It remains preserved in a reliquary at Alba de Tormes. Every year, thousands of pilgrims come to see it. Physical proof that what Teresa experienced was not metaphor. The cost of love left a permanent mark on her actual flesh.